Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone joining us from around the world. Welcome. My name is Cecilia Mwende Maundu, and I'm absolutely honored to serve as your moderator today for this critical session, addressing digital pushbacks for FGM programming. As we get started, please type into the chat where you are joining us from today. First, a few housekeeping rules. Before we dive into our session, let's ensure everyone is set for a smooth and interactive session today. For interpretation, first and most importantly, simultaneous interpretation in French is available. To access this channel, please click on the globe icon labeled Interpretation at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select French. To keep our virtual environment clear of background noise, all participants' lines are muted upon entry. We want this to be an active, shared space. Please use the chat box to introduce yourselves, share your thoughts, and drop your questions for our speakers throughout the session. Today's session is being recorded. The recording, along with all the presentation slides and toolkits, will be emailed to you after the event. If you experience any technical issues, please message our tech host directly in the chat for assistance. So as a journalist and a digital security trainer, I've witnessed firsthand how digital platforms can be a dual-use space. They're incredibly tools for amplifying survivor voices and community-led abandonment. However, they're also increasingly weaponized by opposition forces to stall our progress. Today, our goal is to move beyond simply acknowledging this problem. We want to arm you with practical, professional, and actionable digital strategies to protect your programs and your advocates. We have an incredible, and I mean incredible, focused agenda ahead of us today. First, Helmin Norman will break down the characteristics of the digital landscape, mapping exactly how online opposition and FGM supporting narratives operate across social media platforms. Next, Alexander Robinson will share insights on the safety by design framework, offering practical, ethical technology resources to protect our FGM advocates, survivors, and online campaigns from digital violence and backlash. Then, we will get a first-hand look at the DIOS tool with Dr. Godwin Akpan to see how we can monitor these digital environments in real time to track and counter FGM-related misinformation. Finally, we will transition into a programmatic brainstorming session to discuss how we can actively interrogate these digital strategies, safety frameworks, and monitoring practices directly into a country-level FGM intervention. I think this is one of the sessions that I'm really excited about, followed by a 30-minute interactive Q&A. So, to set the stage, it is my distinct honor to invite the UNFPA's FGM advisor and the global coordinator of the UNFPA UNICEF Joint Program on the Elimination of FGM, Dr. Wissal Ahmed, for our opening remarks. Dr. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you all for the participants coming today, making time to join this important conversation. Let me start by saying that mass media, the use of mass media is an effective intervention to shape attitudes and end FGM practice. You may not be surprised by knowing that close to 70% of the global population are active social media users, spending an average close to 7 hours per day online. So this conversation today will focus on the digital sphere, digital platforms, communication technologies, data, online conversations, and culture. Our goal today is to see what is happening, what resources that we could use to keep it safe, ethical, and monitor it. So this session today is really, or this webinar today is designed for you. I urge you all to look and listen to the presentations shared by our esteemed presenters and have in mind how the knowledge that you are going to receive, how it will apply into your day-to-day actions on FGM elimination. So I encourage you all to use the chat space dynamically, share your experiences, tell us about the digital discourse conversations on FGM that you have witnessed, for example, online, and how you are going to apply the learnings from the presentations today to your day-to-day work. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them on the chat, and we have a dedicated Q&A session on that. With that, I'd like to thank you and hand over to Cecilia.
Thank you so much for welcoming us, and we are excited. And as we said, we have an incredible group of speakers today. I would like to remind you about typing in your questions in the chat so that we are trying to make this as interactive as possible and as organic as possible and as symbiotic as possible. So we would like to hear your voice. So to set the stage, thank you, Daktari, as we say back home, for setting that powerful and urgent stage. So to kick off our first deep dive, let's look closely at who and how of online opposition. I'm pleased to introduce Helming Norman. Let me just apologize if I have butchered your name, who will walk us through the core characteristics of digital pushback, identify key actors, and share the critical takeaways from our latest research on discourse mapping. Again, as Helming presents, please drop your initial thoughts and questions into the chat. Helming, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to go very quickly through a presentation that draws on research I conducted into the digital space around FGM from 2007 to 2025. I assume everybody is okay with you're looking into the screen, okay, right? So in this research, I looked at how the wider online environment developed over time and across different platforms. I was interested in several questions, including what gains visibility, how FGM is framed, when backlash forms, and under what conditions prevention messages circulate. I also wanted to deepen our understanding of the role digital discourse plays in shaping the environment around FGM and what that means for prevention work. I'll begin with what I examined and how, then I will look at how attention forms on X, the positions of the UN system accounts there. From there, I will move to YouTube, and if there is time, to Facebook, and then to emerging AI layer. I will end with what the findings suggest for prevention and response. So what you see here is the analysis, as I mentioned, is cross-platform. This is what you see here is X, and the methodology is it combines three lenses: social science, data science, and graph theory. The combination matters because no single method is enough. We need social science to understand the narratives, data analysis and data science to understand timing and scale, and network analysis to understand the structure. This figure is the temporal user network on X. It shows both part of the research approach, but also some of the key findings. Each node is a user who participated in the conversation. And each line between nodes represents an interaction between the user or the users, such as a reply or a quote. And the slider here allows us to see how the network developed over time. What stands out is that the discussion does not form one shared conversation. Instead, it separates into two main arenas. The red cluster here is more shaped by abolition messaging, public health framing, and campaign activity. The blue cluster is a more politicized, high attention space. Here, FGM is more likely to be pulled into wider debates about ideology, identity, and legitimacy. That extension matters because prevention messages do not circulate under the same conditions everywhere. I will explain that in a bit. But so basically here you see here, this is how the conversation started since the very first day Twitter was born until December 2025. You can see here, again, we have the red cluster. That is the FGM-centered advocacy public health cluster, and then the highly politicized high attention cluster here. This helps us understand not just the structure, but also you see, which I'll come back to this later, that here we have like Grog here, and this is the AI assistant, and it shows that, okay, it's being used by so many, and now it's part of the social platform, okay? Now, it also, let me go back here very quickly, but this also helps us see where the UN accounts appear. Obviously, they are in the health and advocacy cluster, okay? I'll get back to that later as well. But now that was the structure, but now this is the content. What type of content emerged? The recurrent lines. The thing here, we see first comparison as one of the major lines of argument. FGM is compared with male circumcision, shifting the discussion away from harm and protection towards claims of hypocrisy or unequal treatment. Then we have medicalization. Here, the practice is presented as safer, less severe, or manageable if it is regulated or performed in a clinical setting. This may sound like harm reduction, yes, but it can also legitimize continuation, blur the line between prevention and accommodation, and make enforcement more difficult. Naming is another battleground. They chose between terms such as mutilation, cutting, sunnah, fitra, khitan, and circumcision affects how people understand the harm, the intent, and the legitimacy of the practice. Some users prefer softer language to make FGM appear less harmful or more socially acceptable. Then we've got religion and authority. They are also major areas of contestation. The question is not only what religion says, it is also about who has the standing to interpret it. Some users cite fatwas declaring FGM forbidden and not part of the Sunnah. Others question the legitimacy of those rulings, including rulings associated with institutions such as Al-Azhar, the Cairo-based prominent religious institution, claiming they were actually politicized or changed only after governments criminalized the practice. In some settings, and we see this in countries such as in Indonesia, for example, local or national religious authorities say that they, rather than the international organizations or outside institutions, should be the proper source of guidance. So even when prevention messages are backed by recognized religious institutions, the authority of those institutions can itself become part of the dispute. So what we see here is that people can draw on competing religious voices either to reinforce prevention messages or to undermine them. Another recurring pattern is agenda switching. Instead of discussing FGM mainly as an issue of harm and protection, people are redirected into wider political and identity disputes. Some frame it as incompatible with, quote unquote, Western values and fold it into Islam versus civilization narratives and link it to debates about the hijab in the West, abolition, feminism, or homosexuality, or presented as for a foreign agenda promoted by international institutions. Again, attention is pulled away from protection and into conflict over identity, legitimacy, morality, or national belonging. Then we've got gender, with gender politics and the regulation of women's sexuality are also central as they emerge in the data. Examined supportive claims present FGM as a way to reduce women's desire, preserve chastity, protect virginity before marriage, or improve a girl's marriage prospects. Some religious material even links reduced desire with being more acceptable to a husband. Others claim that men in some cultures will not marry quote unquote uncut women. So the positions differ, but they revolve around the same underlying terrain. That is, women's bodies and sexuality being judged in relation to chastity, family honor, marriageability, and male approval. Okay, here we see the timeline here shows that attention to FGM does not build steadily. It comes in bursts. Some of those bursts follow predictable advocacy periods, especially around the International Day of Zero Tolerance for FGM. Others are triggered by controversy, developments, policy changes, conflict, or media attention. So while campaign peaks can be opportunities for coordination and message enforcement, spikes outside campaign periods are more likely to call for early warning, closer monitoring, and certainly rapid response. Okay, now let's see. I'm going to skip this for the sake of time, but we can come back to it if there are questions related to the positions of the UN and the network. So beyond X, YouTube adds a different a layer to the discussion. At the video level, as you see in the screen, at the video level, advocacy and awareness content is prominent, but there is also news coverage, documentary material, testimony, religious discussion, and educational content. The comments section, however, on the right side, show a more contested picture. These are the user-generated comments. This is where many of the arguments we have already seen become especially visible. People debate equivalence, religion, culture, sexuality, health, and law. So YouTube is not simply another channel for broadcasting awareness messages. It is actually a place where people argue at greater length about whether the practice is legitimate, harmful, religiously required, culturally important, or even legally acceptable. So that is why YouTube matters here. A few illustrative examples here. We see a video that frames FGM as a religiously permissible. We see a question and answer page that presents supposed medical benefits of FGM. And we see a social media page on Facebook that recasts the issue as a matter of personal choice. These are different formats, but they present the same operational challenge. They make the practice searchable and discussable in everyday digital space. Now, looking at the actors, these are actually the actors' environment. They include civil society and advocacy actors, which is great, but they also share the space with news organizations, personal creators, religious voices, and smaller expert communities. This means that influence is distributed. Advocates are not the only actors shaping how FGM is understood online. So a communication strategy cannot focus on one type of actor alone. It has to take into consideration the wider mix of voices. Now, as if that's not enough, it's not really crowded. Now we've got the AI. The mixed actor environment now includes AI as the main actor, or as a prominent actor. People are not mainly discussing AI as a topic, and instead they are calling on Grok, the ex-AI assistant, during live comments. They ask it to define terms, compare practices, provide statistics, explain legal status, or in some cases even offer religious interpretations. Now participants no longer rely only on institutions, expert religious sources, news reports, or personal testimony. They can now introduce an AI-generated answer into a contested discussion within seconds. So the concern is not only whether an individual answer is right or wrong, but it is that these answers can sound confident and can then be repeated or circulated without much scrutiny. So this is more than a technology trend. It's actually a change in how evidence and authority are being introduced and used within the FGM discourse. Okay, I'm gonna stop. This is my last slide here. So taken together, the findings point to several practical priorities. One, there is a need for more localized and survivor-centered response content. This is especially important for recurring arguments about sexuality, honor, chastity, and marriageability. I've examined the general awareness messages. My finding is that they may not be enough to address those deeper social justifications. Two, affected people's voices need to be more visible in both content design and public communication. Their experiences should help shape not only the message, but also how the issue is framed and explained. Uh, Three, AI now needs its own monitoring track. This should include monitoring and examining the quality and consistency of the answers they provide. So finally, the main takeaway is that the online environment is not separate from prevention work. It is one of the places where the meaning, the legitimacy, the public understanding of FGM are being shaped. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helmin. Knowing who is driving the narrative and having that information and how they scale is absolute vital. But once we understand the landscape, how do we build protective barriers is the question around our digital interventions. I now welcome Alexandra Robinson to the floor. Alexandra will introduce to us the Safety by Design framework, an approach that embeds security and ethics into our digital campaigns from the beginning rather than as an afterthought, meaning being more proactive rather than reactive. While Alexandra is presenting, I have a question for our audience to answer in the chat. What digital safety measures does your team currently prioritize when publishing content online? Share your practices with us. Alexandra, please take the stage.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And I think you said it right when you said, what are the protective barriers that we need to put in place to try and make sure that the narratives that we do have around FGM are positive narratives that address the issue instead of reinforce the issue. I am going to talk to a guidance that UNFPA have published on the safe and ethical use of technology to address GBV and harmful practices, including FGM, as a primary resource that we should all be using when we think or consider the use of any kind of technology or work, but also in our advocacy with other technology and other platforms, which Helmi raised in his presentation to work towards preventing the issue. Maybe over to the next slide, please. Thank you. Here is a QR code for the guidance in case anyone would like to access it directly. Of course, I can also put a link to the UNFPA site in the chat. Okay, so over to the next slide, please, and I'll move into, I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'll move into the presentation in some detail. So essentially, what we know is that regardless of whether that technology has been designed for a malicious purpose or whether the designer is negligent or indeed accidental, the outcome will be exactly the same. So what we mean here is you have a motivation to cause harm. If that technology has not been designed in a way that prevents harm or has been done to consciously ensure safety by design, safety, security, privacy by design principles, it will have exactly the same impact. And some of these impacts, for example, are the way in which algorithms and different
Alexandra, we are losing you. So as we wait for Alexandra, because there's...
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Kindly repeat your last line and welcome back.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize my internet had dropped out. Really, what I wanted to say was inclusive tech design is critical because if we don't have that process of inclusion of women, people, or women in all their diversity in different marginalized communities, what we will see is a technology that replicates the bias of developers. And not all of those, for example, are survivors of FGM. Secondly, we know social media algorithms are often content agnostic and engagement driven. And I think, as Helmi raised before, when we see narratives being reproduced and even more so through the use of AI, we see the replication of internalized gender bias, stereotypes, and harmful norms, including, for example, the medical benefits of FGM. Third, we see a lack of appropriate content moderation. So there's a real lack of investment globally in content moderation. And we know that FGM does not happen in an English-speaking country. It happens in a wide range of countries. Helmi started talking about really localized narratives. Really, really important to understand that those content moderation algorithms that might have been developed are disproportionately targeting and blocking individuals from different marginalized communities. So really, really important to take that into account. Lastly, we know there's a lack of appropriate support and response mechanisms. A lot of tech companies, they might have terms and conditions for dealing with different forms of violations or the use of narratives around the medical benefits of FGM, for example, but very little in the way of really responsive mechanisms to prevent and take down that kind of content. Over to the next slide, please. Thank you. So really, when we look at technology, the design and the use of technology, it's really, really important to know that when we access a technology or when we design that technology, it's often producing data. So really, really important, or it does produce data unless it's been designed not to, which is often more difficult than it sounds. But so really, really important here to combine some of the principles around, for example, the GBV core principles and FGM core principles around doing no harm, making sure it's survivor-centered, informed consent, and so on, as well as data-specific principles. Now, these principles here are drawn from a wide range of guidance, international guidance and tools, and these speak to issues like purpose limitation. Don't collect the data if you don't need it. Making sure there's informed consent, and not just informed consent at the time of collection of data, but ongoing informed consent to the storage of that data and use of that data. Also looking at systems of accountability, confidentiality, accuracy, and data quality. So there's a whole range of principles here around data, that need to be taken into account when we think about how we go into designing technology, knowing that that technology is very likely to be collecting data. Over to the slide, please. One of the best ways of thinking about safe and ethical design of technology is to really think about a three-legged stool. And here, and I've said it a few times through the presentation, this idea of safety, security, and privacy, all three of these parts are really important components of design and technology. And without one of these parts, that stool falls over and we don't have safety, privacy, and security at all. So there are three different parts here. First of all, there's safety. So we really need to make sure that user safety, the person, is at the center of that product development. And really important then to make sure that we empower users in accessing and using that technology, that there's a high level of transparency and accountability. And thirdly, that we do have service provider responsibility for the safety of the user accessing that product. Security means that we need to have design controls that prevent the misuse of an application by malicious parties. So, for example, making sure that we don't design AI that can create non-consensual synthetic images, which can then be shared across multiple platforms, or we have a platform that is designed to spread mis and disinformation, as Helmi spoke to in the previous presentation. The last area is around privacy. So really, really important to make sure that privacy is embedded into all the design specifications of both policies and practices, but also that networked system of architecture, just to make sure that we achieve the strongest protection possible. And over to the next slide, please. All of these components that I've been talking to today, at the end of the guidance that I'm speaking to, we actually have a step-by-step process for practitioners who are working on addressing gender-based violence, including FGM and child marriage, and technology, to try and help practitioners understand at what point they need to be involved in the tech design process. So often what we see is, development partners, practitioners, technologists to help design a product for them to do a certain thing. And they sort of come up with the design or the idea and then come in again at the implementation right at the end or the deployment. But there are, as you can see here, 17 steps along the way. And what we highlighted throughout this continuum here, or this here, there's a whole range of areas where the practitioner, the GBB, FGM practitioner needs to be involved with the IT company, where the IT company might take the lead, or where the GBB and FGM practitioner would take the lead. So really important to make sure that all of these different areas are areas that you both understand, but also engage in a really substantive way. Again, across all of these different steps, important to ensure that the considerations of doing no harm, the participation of users, participatory approaches to technology is incredibly important to make sure that the product reflects the purpose. Use and accessibility, safeguarding, the data analysis, and consent. And finally, over to my last slide. This last slide really just speaks to some of the key highlights and that you can pull out of the guidance on safe and ethical use of technology. Really, that data really matters, that it is at the center of that tech product. So understanding the collection, storage, and use of that data and making sure that there is consent around it is really, really important. And I think also a general recognition of the sensitivity of that data. Important to understand what those gaps are, really making sure that women and survivors are at the center of those design processes, that they're not an afterthought, that they're not just considered a user. And lastly, really important to remember, as I've said before, all of us have that responsibility to understand, prevent, and mitigate those risks. And that might be going ahead with a project or not going ahead with the project, as the case may be, but really important to think through all of those risks as you go through the process from ideation right through to deployment. And with that, I will say thank you very much for having me, and I'm really happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Cecilia.
And we are also happy to have you, Alex. Thank you so much. Amazing and crucial insights. Proactive safety is our shield. But, and I repeat, but continuous real-time monitoring is our radar. We cannot respond to threats we cannot see. And in case there is a point that you would like Alex to repeat that was missed out during the small technical hitch, please type it on the Q&A and in the chat. And in case we have time, we're going to respond to it. So to show us that we can keep our radar active, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Godwin Akpan. Dr. Akpan will introduce to us the DIOS tool, a tailored digital scanning resource designed specifically to help our global community monitor, track, and analyze anti-FGM and harmful practice narratives in real time. Dr. Akpan, please show us how this tool supports our community and how teams can integrate it into their routine workflows. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Cecile. I don't know if Loic is gonna display this, or I could go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So a bit of intro while these slides load up. The demographic intelligence from open sources, otherwise called DIOS, is our working version of a media scanning tool. It's built from some of the successes of the WHO epidemic intelligence from open sources, which basically scans on a daily basis, I think about 45 million articles, and synthesizes all that idea that comes from there into blocks that can detect outbreaks before they actually happen. Say, for example, it picks a bunch of things talking about measles, is clustered into a district, and we now suspect that measles may be happening in that area, and we're able to triangulate and start to respond. So it's like an early warning tool. So basically, the demographic intelligence from open sources is built around the same thing, connecting to WHO EIOS and connecting to this global database of events, language, and tone. So what we are reading is millions of articles and then triangulating them into this areas located around here. So we have FGM, child mortality, maternal mortality, obstetric fistula, and harmful practices across board. And then AI comes in to interpret that, put some sentiment attachment, and then we're able to have countries validate that. I think that should give you a bit of a picture of how it works, trying not to be too scientific. Next slide. Great. So I've talked about how the EIOS works. So what DIOS does is that it lays on top of it the GDEL, the global database of events, and open news media. We're just picking up public commentaries, reports, and communications that are out there in the open. And then we can ask the questions around, is it real? Is it urgent? What can we do and use this information for? Next slide. Now, this is the pipeline of how it works. It picks the public sources, it puts it into thematic libraries, and this is where the work of Helmi that has really outsourced, has really showcased the thematic keywords that are being used for FGM across different contexts. We take those keywords and plug them into these libraries, so we are able to do a little bit of natural language processing by topics, by country location, and sentiments. Very important. And we do have 4 sentiments that we're looking at. What are the positive things that are happening based on the context of FGM? What are the articles that look like neutral things? These are publications, scientific publications. What should we be concerned about? and what should we be very, very concerned about. So the moderate and the high concern are very powerful context for us. So we really look out for that. And then lastly, the human in the loop. We allow countries to have a say, and the key players to have a say. This news you're reading, is it something that we're comfortable with? Is it biased? Is it owned by the country, or no? Is it a source that we're comfortable with? And all of this is very important, even aligning with some of the principles of do no harm, which Alexander has talked about. Next slide. And so this deals, we're using it across different, fine, we're zeroing in on FGM for today, but we're using it across the different areas of UNFPA mandate and just getting some level of early detection of trends. It is not a prevalence thing, it's more of an early warning of trends are changing. In these other discussions, this is where we are tending to. So country teams can now make better decisions or last mile planning based on this. Because most of our surveys come in 5 years. Our censuses happen every 10 years. Surveys like DHS are happening every 5 years. It does come in quite a bit late, but DHS is able to pull that real-time information, triangulate it, and make sense for us. Next slide. I'll skip this. Next. Great. So this is what a typical dashboard of DIOS looks like. This is the FGM narrative. We have a cluster of red areas where we means that we have clustered more than one or two harmful practices happening there of FGM, or high, moderate, and high concern articles are quite a lot in those areas. And then we have some positive news being denoted by green. So generally, the clusters is an aggregation of number of articles that are in that area. I mean, if you zoom in into the smaller areas, you start seeing a bit of the real situation. I would like to quickly share my screen. I hope you can see that. Please confirm. Anyone confirm that they can see this? Great.
Yes, we can.
Great, perfect. So on the right side, we are having all of this data streaming in from the different clusters around FGM by country. And on the left side, we have this real-time map that is recording all the things that are happening in terms of the articles is red. So we can actually zoom into areas and see what is happening. Why is this places in Nigeria a little bit clustered in red? And we can actually read the articles that are there. There's a one article there that has been zoned into the geography. Sorry, it didn't really show properly. Let's see, let's pick Sudan. I could zone in on that page and say, all right, let's see two articles that made that area in red. And it tells us there's a high concern article, reports on the ongoing civil war in Sudan and displacement, urgent humanitarian crisis, and linked to FGM prevention not being carried out, affecting critical services like reproductive care, FGM prevention. So this is a high concern, and the AI is actually right. But we can also have countries have a say. What is this geography? What do you think about it based on local knowledge? And we could have feedback, that second validation layer. But across board, this is happening in real time. Showing all the geographies and what is happening. And this really gives us a very great perspective of emerging trends and understanding how it's happening across the different geographies, across even lower geographies. And then importantly, we can also, we know that this is a lot of information, but we can synthesize this for our country teams to make sense out of it and actually have mitigation plans based on the context. So if I click view summary here, you could actually see, let me quickly share. I think it's changed pages. So let me just show that. You see something like this comes up. It tells you the geographic distribution by countries and the main important articles like Gambia has 3 articles. A 2015 law penalizing FGM is facing challenges. Something is happening in there, and it's quite an important news. And Supreme Court is set to rule on lifting the FGM ban, with feminist organizations campaigning vigorously. It states everything that is of importance at country level. It also puts together the common trends and the geographies it's happening, um, and legislative progress and implementation challenges. This is the AI cross tabulating all that data and trying to make sense out of it. Um, it also tells us emerging trends and systematic gaps, cross-border and migration-related FGM. And then it aligns with what UNFPA is doing, what pillars and interventions using our strategies that can guide country. And not only that, it gives us positive developments that are also taking place where we can learn from and also have other countries copy and paste, and also helps us to support those countries in thinking alongside this. I'll stop here. I think we'll take more questions. I think this is quite interactive. Um, Thank you very much, Cecile, for having us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akpan, for those amazing insights. Seeing the DOS tool in action makes it clear that we have the technical capacity to stay ahead of these trends. But let's talk about implementation, because they say implementation is king, and it is. We have covered the research, we have covered the safety frameworks, and we have seen the monitoring tools. Now, how do we apply all this in our day-to-day work, from frontliners to government and non-governmental partners in field programs and technology? To our participants in the chat, I want to pose this question to you. Based on what we have heard from our speakers so far, what is one actionable step you can take back to your work and in your country tomorrow? So while you type, let's summarize the 2 core takeaways from today's presentation. Number 1, regularly scan using the DOS tool to identify digital discourse locally at your local content. Number 2, develop digital campaigns or movements incorporating a safety by design checklist. I see some questions and excellent ideas coming through in the chat. So let's keep this momentum going. And now I will move to the Q&A. As I said, we have a very fantastic engagement going on, and please keep it up. So the first question that, first of all, I would do the programming takeaways. Number 1, YouTube matters now in many aspects: religious, culture, business, health, and many more. Influencers are now distributed, but not only advocates. Communication should not only target advocates. AI, which is something that has been talked about, is now prominent, and people use it for many aspects, including defining concepts, providing information. Hence, we need to have update information for AI use. Tech companies, I've seen a question for tech companies. Tech companies lack proper support mechanism to prevent digitally imposed violence. And the first question will go to Alex. What responses should we give to tech companies who say that safety by design stifles innovation and gets in the way of how they do get profit? How do we get them to commit to designing safe products? To you, Alex.
The question I want to answer, it's spot on. It's the question I think where you have all been grappling with for decades. I think since work in the digital rights movement, specifically relating to gender GBV harmful practices nearly 30 years ago, and we still haven't solved the problem. I think predominantly there's a tension between the move fast, break things of the world of tech and private sector and innovation, and the world of go slow and do no harm. And I don't think we've managed to break break it yet. And I think over the last few years, where we've seen the complete formation of the trust and safety space as a profession across tech companies, it's becoming increasingly difficult. What I would say is that we know it's possible, and it's just a matter of being able to demonstrate and showcase that it is in fact possible to do no harm. It is in fact possible to center safety by design. And there are different strategies for doing that. We have, for example, you could look at policies or laws in countries that review the product before it goes to market to make sure that it has complied with a whole range of different safety by design principles in law. The e-Safety Commissioner in Australia, for example, has this embedded into the regulators, into the law, into the legislation that regulates or supports the e-Safety Commissioner in the deliberation of their work. So I would say it's possible. We have been running a tech safety showcase, which is all about centering gender and safety by design in technology, and that has been run at both the global level and more recently in the Asia Pacific region. And through that process, we've been able to demonstrate that it is in fact possible, and use that as a platform to promote safe and ethical design of technology. Thanks, Cecilia.
Thank you so much, Alex. What I'm hearing you say is safety by design it is possible for sure. So the next question is for Helmi. I have come across the narrative where the ban on FGM laws protecting women and girls is considered a tool for new colonialism, and pushback is being framed as we are reclaiming our cultural identity and sovereignty. What do you have to say about that?
Well, indeed, that is a big topic that we see so frequently, and that fits into the category of the politicization and the agenda switching. We see so many people now claiming, okay, FGM is a feminist thing, feminism is a Western thing, so let's go back to our roots and our cultures. So that is a big theme that we see so frequently. Yes.
Okay, the next question is for Dr. Akpan Godwin. How does the message go through, knowing that social media platforms are continuously censoring content related to women's health and particularly sexual and reproductive health? I read that 84% of ads related to women's health are pulled or rejected on social media platforms.
Okay, great. Thanks, Cecile. Yes, we do acknowledge this a very important limitation. Dios does not assume that everything people are saying is visible online. In fact, we assume that there is some level of censorship of women's health and sexual reproductive health content. It's also part of that intelligence we need to understand, that censoring. So we don't depend only on social media to triangulate all these signals. We add the EIOS, WHO EIOS, we add the GDELT, we add online news, public reports, organizational websites, and anything that is open source, and then connect all these signals with some part of our official statistics and country knowledge, so that we're able to identify this information gap rather than just interpreting silence as the absence of a problem. So we're not saying that this is a complete public conversation. We're saying that this is part of the conversation that remains observable. And there are biases, there are missing voices, there's censorship, but in all, we're trying to get the best out of what we have and being able to help countries navigate the emerging trends that are coming up. Yeah. Over.
Thank you so much. Helmi would like to add on that. Helmi.
Yes, on the issue of censorship, actually, part of the problem is the lack of context. So social media often tracks issues the keywords such as breast or vagina. So if there isn't enough sufficient context, such content is likely to be censored. So a practical advice to advocates who produce content related to homosexuality is to always provide sufficient context. That is important. But I also want to raise another related point, and that is there is now blocking of websites about women's sexuality. That is another challenge. And I don't know if you've seen a report that was released about a couple of weeks ago, but I do recommend that you check it out because that is another problem, and it does need advocacy on that issue and the importance of unfiltered access to women's health. Thanks.
Thank you, Helmi, for that. Alex, I would like to come back to you. The guidelines were established in 2023. Technology evolved since then. Any updates you have?
Oh, thank you, Cecilia. The guidelines apply equally. So even though technology is moving at a rapid pace, the fundamental principles around privacy, security, and safety remain as they are. I would say the issues around data and the way we protect and use data are even more important to be considering, to taking into account, and user safety. So all the principles that I outlined throughout the presentation, I think with new and emerging technologies have only become more important, but not changed necessarily.
Thank you so much. The last question.
DIOS in action.
Dr. Godwin, there is a question for you. Is DIOS in action live right now?
Yes, it is in life. We actually have our data streaming in from all these platforms, and it's also being read by AI. A human being can read 45 million articles, so it's being read by AI and translated into the sentiments and showing on this maps in real time. However, we've not opened it up for public use yet. We're still adding the human in the loop aspect. So we have very selected couple of people who can slice and dice that data at that point. We're also adding a bit of hardening context to ensure that some of the news that is zeroing in on certain districts might not show like that. We might have to scramble and anonymize that. But importantly, is able to structure the interventions we would like countries to have and really present it in a way that they actually own the whole process.
Thank you. And this person is still asking if you can share the link to the link and also the diagrams from the first presentation. Yes, we mentioned that we are going to share the presentation. So if it's possible to share the link. Thank you. I'll come to Alex, back to you, Alex. Sorry, I know too many questions, but this is the last one, I promise. Please elaborate on the gaps regarding GBV actors and good intention.
Thank you. Look, I think probably one of the biggest gaps we have is that practitioners come to a problem, recognize that technology might be a way to provide a solution very quickly, very effectively. It might reach large numbers of people. The gap that we see is a really low level of digital literacy. So understanding the way in which technology may in fact be causing harm instead of alleviating the harm is the primary issue. So I think, there's a whole sort of process that I think we need to go through when we talk about inclusive design and making sure that users are part of that design process. It's understanding what is their access to technology, what does their digital literacy look like, how do we make sure that when we deploy a product, it's deployed deployed equitably? How do we make sure in the case of social media platforms that that social media platform has the right tools to prevent harm instead of promote harm? So I think across practitioners who decide they want to deploy technology or design and deploy technology, making sure they're part of the design process, and that requires some digital literacy. But then the second part of that is making sure that the populations who we work with have levels of digital literacy to be able to access or have equitable access to technology to make sure that the deployment of the technology doesn't deepen inequalities and harm. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm going to come to Helmi. Can you provide more details on narratives around FGM medicalization and harm reduction?
Sure. So some argue that banning FGM forces some families to go underground into unhealthy settings. So their counter argument then is let's medicalize this. By that they promote legalizing doing it in medical settings, because their argument is if families do it at home, then that's not safe. But if they do it in medical settings, that should be better, because again, it is an option to accommodate the practice rather than to eliminate it.
Thank you, Helmin, for clearing that out. So there's a question for Dr. Akpan. I work in the northern Nigeria, where majority of the people are backward in terms of tech, and FGM is mostly taking place in villages where they are also backward in technology. How can we get the message across to them?
Yeah, thank you, Cecilia. I mean, based on experience from running through DIOS, looking at the positive things we've built around that, the positive sentiments that come through. More of the time, we see that it is the digital engagement begins with trusted community structures. All right. Especially in the context of Northern Nigeria. I'm Nigerian myself, so I really understand how it can be quite difficult, because this message is, if they're not carried through by traditional and religious leaders, it already hits a big challenge, and it never goes through. So the idea around this is that we empower community health workers, women groups, teachers, and respected local champions, because trust is often more important than the technology itself. We may be able to find these smaller geographies where these things are happening. DIOS could detect misinformation, pro-FGM narratives, in areas where these discussions are weak or absent. But more important, these signals must be combined with community knowledge, health facility, local knowledge, and it must be owned by the community, and we really have to find ways of empowering them, unless we're not moving the needle. Over.
Thank you for that. And I will still come back to you, Dr. Godwin. The question here is on terms of, somebody's asking, in my setting, one of the major challenges is limited use of digital platform. And I believe it's almost a follow-up to that, limited use of digital platform to support efforts to end FGM. How can digital visibility and engagement be strengthened in high prevalence settings to enhance FGM prevention and community awareness?
That's a very difficult and challenging one. We do have our limitations. Interestingly, for Africa, the internet penetration rate is about 65%. So it means it's a whooping 35% not covered. And there's no level of digital information that we'll get to there. We have to find smarter ways, ways around things that work without technology. And that's where human beings come in. Finding those local champions, finding people who can speak up, and finding people who know how to address FGM. The best technology can do is find the smaller areas, find how the emerging trends are taking place, how the pushbacks is being orchestrated. But in the end, we need human beings. We need people who will stand with us. We need more advocacy, more sensitization. I know Wisal and colleagues are doing a great work. They just have to keep pushing for those last frontiers, and we pray for the very best. Over.
Thank you. I'll come to Helmi as somebody is requesting that you share the title of the report released.
The report is currently being reviewed and edited by Dr. Wisal Ahmed. Once this is final, it will be released.
So this is a question the two of you, any of you can answer. How can the global community strengthen digital efforts to end FGM? And what role should AI play in developing digital media protocols and procedures to support prevention, advocacy, and public awareness?
Helmi, you want to start?
Sure. So that's a very big question about how can we develop or craft good strategies. I think it is not just one body or one entity that should do that. It is us collectively developing something. So let's do the research. Now that we have some research, let's use the data to identify actors who are aligned or non-aligned with the FGM cause, understand the messages, and then see where we can inject the counter messages. For example, I see one of the biggest gaps here is we have the standard FGM messages. I've examined them extensively, but I do not see them addressing some of the most intimate and probably very powerful messages circulated by advocates for circumcision, quote unquote. And that is the marriageability issue. The claims that some religious literature endorses FGM because that is desired by husbands.
I think
some of these issues are not just again. So we need to address that. And the issue is very quickly the
Helmi, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but your connectivity is shaky.
By both sides.
Helmi? Dr. Akpan?
We need first to understand how AI is being used by both sides or the multiple sides working on FGM, and then based on that we can come up with best practices.
Thank you, Dr. Akpan.
Okay, thank
Please
you.
Make it a tweet.
Okay, great. I do think Alexander actually talked about some of this. She shared a clear example of applying digital protocols to ensure safety, and this the global community can strengthen further, especially the UN as a body in whole can ensure that we establish these safe languages, survivor consent, and content moderation. And also, importantly, we should be at the table having the conversation around how AI is built. Ensure that the guardrails are there so that we can actually improve targeting. And then, above all, keep people in control. The people, human beings generally, will always choose good over evil most of the time. Um, and being able to combine all of these digital campaigns with a lot of radio, remembering my colleague who talked about last mile and how difficult it is for digital things to reach them. But the radio services, especially in places like northern Nigeria, can be very, very powerful because this is communicated in local languages and the communities actually trust this. Over.
Thank you for making it a tweet. So, as they say, all good things must come to an end. Thank you to our incredible panelists, our participants, for such a robust, eye-opening, and strategic discussion today. As we come to the tail end of our conversation, I'm pleased to hand over the floor back to our FGM Global Coordinator, Dr. Wisal Ahmed, for the final word. However, before I do so, I want to say some final remarks. I want to leave you with one final thought. The digital world is a space we have the power to shape. By protecting our advocates, reclaiming our narratives, and choosing safety by design, we can ensure that the internet becomes a powerful shield, not a weapon, for the girls we serve. To bring our webinar to a formal close, I'm now pleased to hand over the floor back to our FGM Global Coordinator, Dr. Ahmed. Give us the final word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia, for your excellent moderation, and many thanks to our great presenters today, and most importantly, to the audience who still continue to give us questions and raise very important points. And I just wanted to say that we will share the recording, the presentations, links to these resources, as well as answers to the questions that have not been answered yet. So thanks so much. Do continue typing. We will save them and respond to you. Today's highlights showed that there is a growing digital movement with mis and disinformation on FGM that we need to be aware of. We also learned that it is important to develop localized messages and content that is survivor-centered, or it is inclusive of survivors, and utilize campaign peaks, discussions to elevate these discussions some more. We've also learned that AI is an emerging use of AI in discussions that we need to monitor to, as somebody said, utilize with more safety and ethical approaches. We've also learned, or we have a resource, a UNFPA resource on how to develop technology that is safe and ethical. And we also, again, have a UNFPA resource, DIOS, that could monitor online or open source content for use. The key takeaway for today is that we must actively incorporate all or monitor this digital content into our everyday work closely and continuously. I'd like to end by saying that we need to continue working hand in hand, ensuring that the digital space remains safe and empowering. We need not forget that populations who do not access digital content or are online, they are still very effective modalities, as Godwin said, like radio, community radios, and other modalities for effective interventions, so that we protect all the girls who are at risk to not undergo FGM. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today and wish you a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.